My name's Zerkovich, and Creative Assembly have enlisted my help with this video to guide you to glory in Total War Warhammer 2. Welcome to this video on how to win battles in Total War Warhammer 2. In order to be victorious on the battlefield, you'll need to think, analyse and understand what's going on. So in this video, we'll go through all the basics of battle and what you need to do to conquer your enemies. We'll begin by talking about the different types of units and what their strengths and weaknesses are. Beginning with your Lord, the most important figure on the battlefield. They could range from a lightly armoured wizard to a massive hulking monster. Whatever kind of Lord you bring, their primary role is very simple: lead the army. They can only do that if they're alive. Protecting your Lord and keeping them in the fight is of the utmost importance. Enemy lords and heroes are their biggest threat, especially if they get outnumbered. So pay attention to where your Lord is at all times, lest they fall into a bad situation. A hero, much like the lords, comes in many different forms. Those that are better at fighting in crowds of enemies, those that are better in one-on-one duels, wizards, monsters, but your melee heroes are your best choice for taking down enemy characters or any kind of infantry. Enemy characters though are probably their biggest threat. Wizards are another type of hero who need to be used differently than melee heroes. Their primary weapon is of course magic, damaging the enemy, debuffing the enemy, buffing your troops, healing your troops. They can serve many purposes. But most wizards are lightly armoured and don't do well in any kind of physical combat, so they need to be protected and avoid those physical confrontations. Melee infantry are your primary killing power. Fantastic against all kinds of other infantry, but they will struggle against monsters. They can also be susceptible to enemy cavalry charges, so watch out for both of those things. One of the most important roles on the battlefield, anti-large units are essential. Typically they come in the form of spearmen and should be your first choice for taking down monsters, cavalry, flying units, anything larger than infantry. Their biggest weakness is fighting any kind of melee force, so watch out for swordsmen and the like. The ranged component of your army, missile infantry, can have many different uses. They can put out damage against all kinds of units, but will also get slaughtered against all kinds of units in any kind of melee fight. So they need to be protected at all times, especially from enemy cavalry who are fantastic for running them down. Cavalry are the agile maneuverable part of your army. They can work to protect your troops or push and engage on the enemy. Charging into the back of enemy infantry while it's fighting your infantry is always a good target. Running down missiles, dealing with enemy cavalry, there's really a lot they can be doing. Their biggest threat is of course those anti-large units. Spearmen, halberds, etc. will put a swift end to your cavalry unless you keep them away. Monstrous units come in many different forms. Small groups, single large entities, fast and agile flying units, they can all be very dangerous. They'll shred through melee infantry with ease, but of course have to watch out for any kind of anti-large unit. Missiles and artillery can also be a real threat for monsters as they are such big targets, but keep them away from those two things and they should serve you well. Artillery is fantastic for dealing damage to your enemy before they've even reached the fight. And while it's capable of doing lots of damage to all kinds of units, most artillery is best off firing into crowds of infantry. But beware, artillery cannot defend itself in any kind of melee fight, so you need to be ready to protect it. So, what is it that sets all different units apart from each other? Well, it's a combination of things, and the unit information panel will tell us everything we need to know. From how many combatants there are in the unit, how many hit points the unit has, all of their different stats, and any abilities will govern how the unit performs in battle. Getting to know and understand all these things is the key to becoming proficient in Total War. So let's go through them. Unit size and hit points are both fairly self-explanatory. The bigger these are, the more punishment a unit can take. Units can have self-regeneration or regeneration cast on them. Armour will determine how much damage a unit can resist. The higher the armour, the tougher a unit generally is, making them harder to get rid of. Leadership is a measure of the unit's psychological strength. As a battle wears on, a unit will take many penalties to its leadership. When its leadership gets too low, they'll lose the will to fight and begin to retreat. Speed is simply how fast a unit moves. Heavily armoured units tend to move slower than lightly armoured ones. On to melee attack, which is one of your more important stats to pay attention to. Melee attack determines a unit's chance of hitting the enemy. So basically, the higher the melee attack, the more damage a unit will do, making some better damage dealers and better at overcoming higher melee defense. Melee defense is your unit's chance to dodge and avoid damage. A unit with high melee defense will be able to hold out and fight for a long time. A unit with low melee defense will take damage very quickly. Another important stat to pay attention to, as is weapon strength, which is a measure of how much damage a unit's weapon can do. which is split into base weapon damage and armor piercing damage. This stat can basically tell you what kind of unit they're best at fighting, but we'll go into this more in a moment. Charge bonus is how much extra damage your unit can do when they charge into an enemy one. This applies on initial contact, but has no effect when units are stationary and fighting. Units with a high charge bonus like shock cavalry could be charged in and pulled away repeatedly to make the most use of that high charge bonus. So, get to know and understand these stats to best wield your troops in battle. Now let's talk more about the importance of armor piercing. An armor piercing unit is indicated by the symbol next to their weapon strength. If you scroll over weapon strength, it'll tell you how much armor piercing and base damage they have. A unit that has high armor piercing damage is best off fighting heavily armored units. This is because no matter how high a unit's armor is, they will feel the full force of that armor piercing damage, whereas base weapon damage may not be able to penetrate the armor. A unit with high base damage but low armor piercing may struggle against a heavily armored unit because a lot of their damage won't be able to get through the armor. And there are many different symbols that you'll come across when browsing unit information. Simply scroll over them to find out what they do, and think of how you could apply that against an enemy. So now that we know what it is that gives each unit its strengths and weaknesses, how does this all come into play when we get into battle? Well, inevitably, each of your units will be faced with an opponent. We can then use the power of prediction to know whether we're going to win against that opponent or not. And it all comes down to the stats. The superior unit is more likely to win unless another unit interferes. So, my white lines of trace here are facing off against Hageneth executioners. As I've selected my unit and I'm hovering over the enemy, you'll see on the unit cards lots of green and red tabs. This is the two units being compared to each other. The green tabs are what the executioners do better than the white lions, and the red ones what they don't do as well as the white lions. So from this, I can see that the executioners have a lot more armor and more weapon strength, with similar melee attack and defense. Overall, I can predict that the executioners will beat the white lions, as they do have the better stats, and rightly so, as they do cost a fair amount more. And it's worth noting that cost is a good indicator of how strong a unit is. It definitely wouldn't be accurate to say though that the more expensive unit will always win. There are many variables. If I wanted my white lions to have a chance of beating the executioners, I'd have to get them some support from other units. So it's all well and good knowing how to use and apply your units in battle, but it means nothing if you didn't bring certain units in the first place. So when composing your units and choosing which ones to bring along, you'll need to think about the faction that you're facing. For example, if I'm about to go to war with the lizard men, I'll want to bring a lot of anti-large units along because they have a lot of strong monsters. If I'm facing the high elves, well, they have a lot of good ranged archers, so I'll have to bring something that can get after them and disrupt them. The Skaven tend to have a lot of numbers and will overwhelm you if you're not careful, so I'll have to bring a lot of cheap units myself so that I can match their numbers to some degree and stop them from overrunning me. And then there's the Dark Elves who have a lot of tough infantry. If I want to take that infantry on, I may be better taking more cavalry so that I can flank round on them and hit their infantry in the back while it's fighting mine. Ultimately, you're trying to prevent the enemy faction from using their strength against you. Keep this in mind when putting your armies together. Now finally, let's take a look at basic army formation and the concepts behind it. An army can be broken up into different parts, each with a different role. The main part is your front line or centre. Their role is to maintain a strong gapless line to help protect each other while they do the majority of the killing for you. Protecting your left side from any fast manoeuvrable attackers will be your left wing or left flank. They need to stop anything from getting behind your centre, and the right wing for the same purpose. These are usually spear and cavalry units, as we've said. And then behind centre, you'll want to position your ranged units and anything that may need some kind of protecting. They're by no means safe back here, but certainly safer than they would be out front. It can be worth keeping a unit or two back here to protect them if need be. So having this basic formation and thinking of your army in different parts that all have roles to play to support each other is a good way to maintain order and control. The beauty of Total War though is the freedom that you get to build different armies and try out different strategies on the battlefield. So don't be afraid to get creative and experiment. With this, I shall conclude this here guide. I hope you found this useful, and thanks for watching.